Today I want to show you how I make my 6-inch miniature mini, I call them, pumpkin applique pillow. Well, pillows, because I'm going to show you a variety of styles you can make. I created a pattern and I also created some tags that I have in my Etsy shops, and I'll link those below for you to check out if you're interested in that. You can also create your own pattern, or you could make tags with your Cricut machine or something like that. You could hand make them. I'll be sharing some of my best secrets, tips, and tricks from many years of sewing and some thoughts on fabrics and style ideas. You will need a pattern, outer fabric, applique fabrics, liner fabric, some iron-on adhesive like a heat and bond, some stuffing material, coordinating threads, and some tools like a sewing machine, iron, scissors, and pins. If you use only one layer of fabric, the fibers from the stuffing will be poking out of the outer fabric very noticeably. So you do need to line them. And the other thing about lining them is it helps smooth out the outer fabric and keep it from looking lumpy, especially if you're using thinner cottons. Start by deciding your style, and these suggestions are good for country, farmhouse, primitive, and more like that. You can choose a few different neutral colors altogether, or you can choose very contrasting colors and patterns. And when choosing that applique, you can incorporate thicker or plushier types of fabric. And if you wanted to, you could use a designer or upholstery type of fabric for the pillow outer. The liner can be a basic cotton, knit, felt, or even something from the discounted fabric section or leftover scraps. Just make sure that you do choose something that won't show through and compete with your outer fabric. These are my favorite muslin fabrics to work with. The Osnaburg. It has flecks in it that make it already look distressed, and I like to use that as part of the applique, but you can also use them as the liner. They're very inexpensive. You want to cut out 2 7-inch squares of your liner fabric and your outer fabric to start with. You can sew them together, and it helps to keep them in place when you're working with them. It's not absolutely necessary. But if you are using something that has a really loose weave on it, like a drop cloth or a burlap, I recommend zigzagging or sergering the outer edge. These are some different examples of plush fabrics and upholstery fabrics that I like to use for the top applique piece, as well as the pillow outer. Now, when it comes to sewing them on the sewing machine, you are going to need a good heavy-duty needle if you're going through a lot of thick layers of fabric, because you don't want your needle to break or bend. And through sewing so many of these, I learned that I really like to use the heavy-duty Singer needles and the jeans, the ones for sewing like denim jeans by, I think Schmetz is the other brand. I wanted to show you a variety of fabric ideas. One of my favorite fabrics to use for pillow making is drop cloth. The thing about drop cloth is it's kind of a roll in the dice on what type you're going to get. And I like to get them from a variety of different places. I like to order ones on Amazon, but even if you order like the same exact ones every time you get them, they'll be different. They don't really make them with the exact same materials. So sometimes they're really tightly woven, and sometimes they have like a loose, thick, and soft weave. I thought I was going to be using some of these paper tags, but I didn't really end up incorporating them into any of the designs, but you can see here I'm just cutting out the applique. And this applique has a top piece and a bottom piece that creates like a layered distress look. And you want to start by ironing on the fusible material for the top applique piece with something like a heat and bond. That's my favorite. It does come in different strengths. Then trace and cut out your pattern in the reverse, and then trace and cut out the bottom layer to your applique pieces. And if you have not heard of them, this is a wool ironing mat that I got off Amazon, and I really like it because it's a little small square that you can iron right in your desk space, and it doesn't take up a lot of room for storage. This applique has a top piece and a bottom piece that creates a layered distress look. You want to start by ironing on the fusible material for the top applique piece with heat and bond or something like that, but I really like to use that for all of my applique projects really, and it does come in a variety of strengths, but this is the strong one that I'm using. And then trace and cut out your pattern in the reverse for the top applique piece, and also trace and cut out your pattern for the bottom layer of the applique pieces. Now when you're ironing on this heat and bond, you just want to make sure you follow the directions on the package, but you just want to take your iron and heat it up on there, but make sure that you don't iron it to your ironing mat or other fabrics in the way. Just touch it within the square where you're ironing. You can see I then flip it over, trim away the excess, and give it one more pass with the iron to get the edges down. And I'm giving you like a visual example of tracing in the reverse, if that helps you to see. You could trace it on the front side of your fabric, but since we're using this fusible piece, it makes it really nice and easy to draw on because it's paper backed. So trace it before you peel off the piece. Then after you cut it out, you just peel away that backing, and you have the area that's exposed that you can then iron down and adhere to your other piece of fabric. Also, these are my favorite scissors to use. You can use whatever scissors you would typically use in your sewing arsenal, but I do recommend when you're working with an applique that you have a good pair of scissors and it has a nice sharp tip on it to get a really good cut, especially when you're cutting out something small and more intricate. That's where you'll really notice a difference on a dull pair of scissors. I like to use this heat and bond on most fabrics. However, though, you can use the lighter weight varieties that they have, especially when working with thinner cottons like this gingham. I wanted to share with you these new chalk markers, whatever you call them, chalk basically, that I got. They're by Dritz, which is a well-known sewing brand, but they're really fantastic. They come with a lot of spare pieces of chalk, and they're really thin, and I didn't know when I ordered them how thin they actually were. And it also comes with this little tiny sharpener, and it has an eraser on there. And it took me a while to decide what kind of chalk to order. I've been using a pen or a pencil for so many years. I used to have just a basic piece of chalk that I wrapped with tape because I don't like the way it feels on my hand. But I do recommend trying something like that if you are new to sewing. It does make a difference when tracing a pattern. Now you can see here the many different varieties of applique pieces I cut out to show you how you can mix and match and play around with different colors. If you use darks, neutrals, of course you can incorporate a lot of color or whatever you like. After you have cut out your applique pieces, you want to remove that paper backing and iron on your front applique piece to your back applique piece. And this really just helps keep it from shifting around when you're sewing. You can add another piece of adhesive to the second back of the fabric, but if you do, you want to cut it out separate and don't go all the way to the edge, because the look of these is to have a little bit of a loose fiber around the edge to give it a distressing look. Once you've ironed your applique pieces together, you want to position them centered on the front of your pillow and leave a little room at the top where you're putting your stem. And you can pin them into place, or like I like to do is just actually hold them while I sew. But I have been doing this a long time, so I do recommend your first go around to go ahead and put just one pin in there. But I start by I always do it in the same order, where I do the left side, then the right side, then the stem, and then I finally go back with the middle piece on top of those. And it gives it that 3D effect. If you don't do it in that order, you won't have the edging showing around the middle piece. And also, as a reminder, make sure you change out your sewing machine needle to a heavy duty one or a jeans one when going through several thick pieces like this, so you don't have any needle breakage. The other recommendation is that you slow on a very slow speed. If you have an older sewing machine, you might not have a choice of speed, but just go slow, because if you don't, you'll find that you might even be skipping stitches, because you're also going through that fusible bond in between the layers, so it is quite thick. After you sew the pumpkin applique piece to the pillow outer, if you want to at this step, you can add a tag, a bow, some form of embellishment, but it's not necessary, it's just optional. You can put a button. You can see that I have a variety of ideas on pillows I'm showing you that I've done. With the tag making, I think I'll do a separate video on how I make tags out of fabric or other materials. Now you're going to pin your squares together, and I like to do it with the pumpkin applique facing up, so you can make sure you're pinning in the right direction and that it looks nice and centered when you're sewing around. And you want to make sure you line up the corners really nicely, because it is a small piece of fabric we're working with here, and leave an opening for where you're going to turn your pillow after you sew it. On this particular fabric that you're seeing here, I'm using the drop cloth, and it's actually, I use the drop cloth for the outer fabric as well as the liner. And I used a serger machine, but you can just zigzag. And I sewed the pieces together because it's a looser weave one and it has a bit of fraying. So I'm not going to trim the quarters on it. But you can see on this other pillow, as an example, where you do want to typically trim your corners. So when you turn the pillow right side out, you don't have a lot of bulk. Now you want to turn your pillow right side out. This is probably the hardest step because it's a really tiny opening, and depending on which fabrics you're using, it can be kind of thick. So don't give up and just slowly work it through with your fingers until you finally get a breakaway and it turns right side out. Now, this is one of my absolutely favorite sewing tools that I've had for probably at least 20 years. I don't know. It's an old Martha Stewart one, and it's actually for paper crafting to like flatten the creases of your pages, but they do make them specifically for sewing as well. It's just a really nice tool to have for all your crafting projects, and it turns your corners out really nicely, so I highly recommend using something to poke out the edges. And after you get it turned right side out, take a look at your applique and trim off any loose fibers. And it's okay to pull a few little fibers off. The intended look is to be distressed. This is my go-to batting. It's a polyester fiber fill made by Polyfill. And it's made in the USA, and it has a really nice fluff to it and spring back. There's another one that I use sometimes by Hobby Lobby, and I really like it as well. I can't remember the brand name offhand, but it's a more dense fabric. So depending on your application, I typically use this one though because it gives it a light, airy, soft, fluffy filling pillow with a nice little squeeze. I know you're not sleeping on it, but it's fun to like pick it up and squeeze it, or if you have guest or someone, or if you're giving it as a gift and the recipient squeezes it, it just, I don't know, it's almost like a distress thing. It feels fun. Now you can sew your mini pillow up however you like. I'm using what's referred to as a hidden stitch, a blind stitch, a ladder stitch, a slip stitch, like several names for this stitch. But what it is you just sew back and forth. And when you pull the thread taut, you can't really see it. And it makes a nice clean finish to the bottom of your pillow. I used to just sew across with a sewing machine, and that's fine too. Or you can just hand tack it shut. And that's it. You're all finished. And this makes a really nice gift. It looks great in little baskets or tiered trays, a bowl tuck or a cupboard stuff or whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to show you some of the varieties that I made. When I use something like this teddy bear fabric, I don't even put the fusible backing on it. And I made these little tags, which I can do a separate video on these. I really love this burlap that's the used coffee and cocoa bean sacks. This one I added a bit of raffia, a little piece of sort of a ticking stripe, grain stripe type of ribbon, and a button. Several of them, I think I put a button in raffia. That one's sort of a gingham, and some primitive looking stars and crows on a few of them. I've always put words on there for more of a farmhouse look, but I wanted to come up with some new designs and styles. And I think this one that says fall on it, and for some reason these colors together is like one of my favorites. I guess that and these little crow ones with the coffee bean sacks. I don't know, they're in like super huge competition to being a favorite. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it inspires you to make something as a sewing project this fall. Thank you for watching.